Hey friends, it's Tomer, and we just got the last two Duskmourn Commander precons revealed today. And in this video, I'm going to be checking out the Rakdos one, Endless Punishment. This is a Rakdos Punisher deck looking to make our opponents lose life every single turn very consistently and punish them for taking certain game actions. So in this video, we're going to check out the full deck list, starting with the brand new cards that are exclusive to the deck, and then we're going to check out the rest of the deck, the reprints. But before we begin, 3 quick reminders. First, you can find all previews from Duskmourn over at mtgpreviews.com. Number 2, if you want to pre-order these sweet new cards, you can do so over at our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. And number 3, if you like this sort of content, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a video. Alright, we begin with the face commander, Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls. This is a 4-mana Rakdos legendary creature Elder Demon. It's a 4/4 with flying. It has ward, pay 2 life. And whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth and draw a card. So every face commander is meant to tell you very clearly what the precon's main theme is about. And in the case of Valgavoth, it's very clear this deck only cares about Punisher, aka Group Slug. We want our opponents to lose life on each of their turns, and then if we do so, we're rewarded by drawing a bunch of cards and also growing our commander. So when this deck is working as intended, if our opponents are losing life on each of their turns, in a typical 4-player free-for-all game where we have 3 opponents, that means we're drawing 3 cards per turn cycle and Valgavoth is getting 3 +1/+1 counters. So it starts off as a 4/4 flyer, and after 1 turn cycle, if each opponent lost life on that turn, we're drawing 3 cards, and we also have a 7/7 flying commander, which is a terrifying threat to have on the board. So the precon is designed to trigger Valgavoth's ability as consistently as possible. 2 very notable reprints, 2 of the best cards in the stock list, are Cataract Parasite and Mogis God of Slaughter. Cataract Parasite just pings the opponent for 1 damage each time they draw a card, including their draw phase. And Mogis will probably deal them 2 damage on their upkeep unless they sacrifice a creature. So if you have either one of these on the battlefield with Valgavoth, that means you're basically guaranteed to trigger Valgavoth on each opponent's turn for maximum value. That easy. And these 2 amazing cards are in the stock precon. They're not going to be the same artwork, and they're not going to be the same set symbol. They're going to have the set symbols that match Valgavoth's set symbol. That's something to keep in mind for this video. I'm trying to get them out as quickly as possible, and I don't have the official card images yet that you're going to see in the actual precon itself. But yeah, the stock list actually has a lot of great cards to maximize the potential of our very powerful commander. So this deck is filled with ways to make our opponents lose a bunch of life, which in itself is already a win condition. Like, as soon as they lose enough life, they just die. And then secondly, it triggers really powerful effects, payoffs for all this group slug, this group punishment with stuff like Valgavoth, our commander, which is the best payoff out of all of them. Our secondary commander also fits with the Punisher / group slug archetype. This is the Lord of Pain. It's a 5-mana Rakdos legendary creature human assassin. It's a 5/5 with menace. Your opponents can't gain life. And whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, choose another target player. The Lord of Pain deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. So the Lord of Pain adds a lot to the stock list. I think the most notable thing it adds to it is that your opponents can't gain life while this is on the battlefield. So that means all this incremental damage that we're dealing to our opponents, they can't just get out of it by gaining a whole bunch of life and then not worrying about all the group slug we're doing to them. They can't gain life while the Lord of Pain is on the battlefield, which is really awesome. Now, the triggered ability, though, doesn't work perfectly with our commander. If it's the active player's turn, the first spell they cast on their own turn, you can't actually just deal damage to that player to trigger Valgavoth. You have to always target a different player. However, if, like, let's say on somebody's turn, somebody casts an instant speed spell, like if you cast like a snuff out or whatever on that player's turn, then you can target that player, make them lose that life with the Lord of Pain, and that'll trigger Valgavoth. So the Lord of Pain doesn't work perfectly with our commander, but it just fits the archetype very well, and it's a very interesting build around if we put it in the command zone and then tweak the list accordingly. So certain cards that work really well with the Lord of Pain are stuff like Deadly Rollick, where it's a spell you can cast for free at instant speed even, so you can cast it on your opponent's opponent's turn to trigger the Lord of Pain on not just your own turn. You can cast it for 0 mana, but then the Lord of Pain will deal 4 damage to a targeted player. Which is great. So you play a very powerful spell. Deadly Relic is just a staple in general, and it just gets better in a Lord of Pain deck because you can cast it at instant speed, so you can trigger that damage ability more often, just not on your own turn. And you cast it for 0 mana, but you still get to do 4 damage to somebody. And then other cards that work really well with the Lord of Pain are stuff like Chandra's Incinerator. You're going to be dealing a bunch of damage to people's faces, and that means you get to also snipe your opponent's creatures at the same time with Chandra's Incinerator. So that card is a staple in this style of deck. So Lord of Pain, not as good in the command zone as the face commander for the stock list. However, it's a very powerful commander in its own right. It just needs more tweaking to make it more powerful to really abuse its abilities. So those are the 2 brand new legendary creatures from the precon, and now we're going to check out the 8 other brand new cards that are exclusive to the deck. We're going to start with Gleeful Arsonist. This is a 3 mana red creature human wizard. It's a 1/2, and whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, it deals damage equal to its power to that player, and it has Undying. So when it dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, you return to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. So this is a perfect Punisher effect for the deck. Your opponents are going to be casting non-creature spells, and this just pings them. Initially, it just pings them for 1 damage, but if you have any ways of growing the Arsonist's power, it can ping for way more damage than that. It scales up, and then when it dies, it will come back with a +1/+1 counter on it, and it will start pinging people for 2 damage instead, thanks to that +1/+1 counter. So it has some resiliency to removal, and it sits around on the battlefield for quite a while, and it's just a really good, reliable source of pinging ability that triggers Valgavoth and all our other group slug type effects. Next, we have Star Athlete. This is a 3 mana red creature human warrior. It's a 3/2 with menace, and when it attacks, choose up to 1 target non-land permanent. Its controller may sacrifice it. If they don't, Star Athlete deals 5 damage to that player. And it also has blitz cost of 4 mana, 3 in a red. If you cast a spell for its blitz cost, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So this is kind of interesting, in that it's a mono red spell that can actually potentially deal with any non-land permanent, which is kind of a pseudo color pie break, because I know Mark Rosewater went on record many times saying that like Chaos Warp being red being able to deal with any permanent type is like, especially enchantments. I think enchantments was the main sticking point of something that red cannot do. Dealing with that is a color pie break. This one is kind of a color pie break in a way, but your opponents have to agree to allow you to deal damage to get rid of that permanent. So I guess it's not. I guess it's more in red's wheelhouse if your opponents get to allow you to do it or not. I don't know. This one's an interesting one. It's a 3/2 with menace, so it's not a great attacker. Honestly, it's often going to just trade or be blocked and then die. But it has a really interesting effect. And if your opponents say no, I mean, they're still taking 5 damage, which is pretty significant. And then it has a blitz cost where you don't even care if it gets blocked and dies. You get that triggered ability, the attack trigger, and then it's going to die anyway, and then you get to draw a card and replace it. So I don't think it's a great card, but it is a funny one at the very least. Next, we've got Barbed Flare Gremlin. This is a 4 mana red creature gremlin. It's a 3/2 with first strike and haste, and whenever a player taps a land for mana, if Barbed Flare Gremlin is tapped, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced, then that land deals 1 damage to that player. I love this card. I love that it's a reference of actually Mana Barbs and Mana Flare put together, and the name even references both those cards. Barbed Flare, Mana Barbs, Mana Flare. Really cute. I like it. Good job, WotC. And the effect is also really cute too. Obviously, it's very good in a group select deck. It's dangerous because you're doubling the mana for your opponents whenever this thing is tapped. It doubles the mana for you too. But the upside, especially in a group select deck, especially in a Valgavoth deck, is that whenever your opponents are tapping mana, including yourself, whenever anybody's tapping mana, they take 1 damage each time a land is tapped. So yes, it is group huggy in that your opponents get a lot of extra mana resources to work against you potentially. But at the same time, they're also losing a bunch of life, and they're going to be very reliably triggering Valgavoth as well at the same time. So really cool card. I love the design. I love the callback. Big thumbs up. Next, we have Persistent Constrictor. This is a 5 mana black 5/3 creature zombie snake, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, they lose 1 life, and you put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature they control, and it's persist, which means when this creature dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 counter on it. So this is a top end card for the deck, and yet another reliable way to make sure you're getting that sweet card draw and +1/+1s off of Valgavoth. Each time its opponent's upkeep, they're guaranteed to lose 1 life, and also you get to shrink something that they control, which is great. It's a bit expensive, but persist means that it's pretty resilient to removal again. This card is great here, but I also want to give a shout out to people who are playing Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons. It's just a slam dunk there because it's a reliable source of -1/-1 counters, so it makes a bunch of snakes for Hapatra, which is awesome. And itself is a snake, so you can even go like Snake Tribal or whatever with Hapatra. Very cool. Next, we've got Suspended Sentence. This is a 4 mana black instant that says destroy target creature and opponent controls, that player loses 3 life. Exile Suspended Sentence with 3 time counters on it. It also has Suspend 3, where you can pay 2 mana instead of the 4. Rather than cast this card from your hand, you may pay 2 mana and exile with 3 time counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter. When the last is removed, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So this is an overcosted removal spell, but the upside is it can kind of stick around forever, right? As long as the game keeps going, you could potentially recast this over and over again for 0 mana advancement. So casting it the first time, it's overcosted, but if you cast it early enough in the game and then you get to recast it a couple times, then it starts paying for itself. It's particularly good in Punisher decks, again, because the opponent not only loses a creature, but they also lose 3 life, so that can trigger Valgavoth or whatever. Outside of that, though, I don't think this card is really worth it. It is cute, though. I like it. Next, we've got Sadistic Shell Game, a possibly political removal spell. It's a 5 mana black sorcery that says starting with the next opponent in turn order, each player chooses a creature you don't control, destroy the chosen creatures. So this card is very interesting because its power level is very high variance, and I think it's going to ultimately depend on how well you can politic, and also how much you're viewed as the arch enemy at the table. Let me explain. For example, here's one scenario. There is an arch enemy at the table. Everybody has agreed that that person is the problem, and they have maybe like 2 or 3 very important creatures that are pulling them way ahead of the game. In this scenario, it's very easy to just agree with the rest of the table that everybody's going to choose one of the creatures the arch enemy controls. They all get blown up, and then the arch enemy probably chooses something else that isn't yours that also gets blown up, which is still a win-win for you. So in a 4-player game, that means 4 different creatures are being destroyed, none of them your own, and you deal with the arch enemy situation. Scenario 2, if there's no clear arch enemy, you can probably talk to the table and everybody just kind of takes out a problematic creature, but nobody takes out your own creatures, so you come up ahead as well. The worst case scenario with this card is you're the arch enemy, so your opponents actually are going to work together to make sure you get the least amount of value from the spell. So I think in that scenario, your opponents can actually work together and they can all choose an inconsequential creature. Like let's say somebody controls a 1/1 Saproling or whatever. So your opponents all choose that and it goes away, whatever. And then you still get to choose the most important threat against you. So you take out an important creature and then your opponents all collectively agree to take out something that doesn't matter. And in that case, that's awful. You know, you killed one good creature for 5 mana at sorcery speed. Horrible. So like I said, the variance on this card is very high. Best case scenario, there's an arch enemy at the table, so you can all agree to like just wipe out their board essentially, and then the arch enemy also gets to take out something else that is scary, that is still not yours, so you still come up ahead. But if you're arch enemy, this card is absolutely useless. So yeah, interesting card. I don't know how good it is, but it is worth playing around. Next, we have a really interesting mana rock. This is Seance Board. This is a 2-mana colorless artifact. It has Morbid. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, put a soul counter on Seance Board, and you can tap it at X mana of any one color, where X is a number of soul counters on Seance Board. Spend this mana only to cast instant, sorcery, demon, and spirit spells. So the baseline of this card is 0, nothing. It does nothing for you. But the ceiling of this card is every single end step, basically. You can start adding more and more counters to Seance Board, and it starts tapping for stupid amounts of mana. However, there's another restriction. You can't just spend that mana on anything. You have to spend it on instant, sorcery, demon, or spirit spells. So I think about basically two homes for Seance Board. Number one, if you're an aristocrat deck that is also demons or spirits, like a spirit deck that is aristocrats, or a demon deck that's aristocrats. I think most demon decks have like an aristocraty theme to them, so that's the most likely candidate for it. Then you can trigger Morbid yourself, and then use this to just fuel out, cast your giant demons or whatever, or spirits or whatever, and that's awesome. Now, it also lets you cast instants or sorceries, but I was thinking, like, what Spellslinger deck actually sacrifices creatures or can use this Seance Board pretty consistently? And I was drawing a blank because I was thinking about mostly, is it Spellslingers? However, there's one Spellslinger deck that I think is going to absolutely love this, and it's a deck that I own, and that's Toshiro Umezawa. Toshiro Umezawa loves killing opponents' creatures. It needs to do that in order to generate value off Toshiro, and so the deck is loaded with kill spells. So in that deck, it actually looks nuts because I'm loaded with instant spells that I could use to ramp out with the board. And also I'm always killing my opponent's creatures, so I'm always going to be triggering Morbid. That's like a win-win. So I'm definitely running it into Toshiro Umezawa. Let me know what cool homes Seance Board will go in for your own decks. I think this card is really, really cool. I absolutely love the design of it. It's such a flavor win, and it's such a possibly powerful deck, but it's a very narrow application, which is my favorite type of card, honestly. Powerful cards that have very narrow applications that you have to work for and make you think about what actual homes it is actually suited for. These cards are awesome. The final new card in the precon is a new room, which is a new subtype of enchantment coming in Duskmourn. These are essentially two cards mushed together, two rooms on one card. And the way it works is you cast one room, one side of the card. In this case, either you pay 4 mana, cast Spiked Corridor, or 4 mana, cast Torture Pit. And then you immediately get the benefit of that side of the card. And then as long as this is on the battlefield, at sorcery speed, you can pay the mana cost of the second side of the card, the second room, to unlock that room and get its benefit as well. Now on the screen, you could read this card easily because it's sideways and it's edited in a way that you can read it properly. But for me, I'm reading it upside down, or sideways rather, and it's really awkward, but here we go. Okay, so one side, Spiked Corridor, 4 mana, red. It says, when you unlock this door, create 3 1/1 red devil creature tokens with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. And then Torture Pit, 4 mana, red. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage, +2 instead. Alright, this card is sweet in basically burn decks, right? Like burn decks and devil decks. Like Spiked Corridor, 4 mana, make 3 1/1 red devils. That's awesome in any devil deck. They die, they deal damage. And then Torture Pit is just really, really solid in any sort of burn deck. We see this effect a billion different times. It's like a Torburn effect, basically, where if you deal non-combat damage, you deal more non-combat damage. And obviously both sides work very well together, because when you have both rooms open, when your devils are dying, they're dealing 3 damage instead of just 1. I don't think this card is like super overcosted or anything. Maybe it's overcosted by like 1 mana on each side, but that's totally fine because it's essentially 2 cards in one, and you get some flexibility on which room you're going to be starting with as well. So yeah, I really like this card. Alright, so we checked out the 10 brand new cards that are exclusive to the deck, and now we're going to check out the rest of the deck list, the reprints. And like I said before, these are not going to be the same card images you're going to see in the actual precon itself. The set symbols are going to be obviously different, and the card artwork is also potentially going to be different too. Now I'm going to start with the top 4 most expensive reprints, and then we're going to look at the other ones. So the most expensive reprint is currently at $15. It's Cataract Parasite, and it's one of the best cards in the entire deck. For 1 mana, you drop this baby down, and as long as you have a red permanent, like your Commander Valgavoth, for example, whenever your opponents are drawing a card, even the first card they draw each turn, it deals 1 damage to that player. So it's always going to be triggering Valgavoth as long as it's on the battlefield. Very, very sweet card just for 1 mana. Incredibly mana efficient. Then Mogus, God of Slaughter is another amazing reprint here. Your opponents have a chance to sacrifice a creature, so against a token deck, this is not very powerful, but against any other type of deck, they're probably just going to take 2 damage, and that's going to trigger Valgavoth, draw you a card, and grow Valgavoth, all that good stuff. Yeah, this card is also fantastic. It's just an indestructible enchantment most of the time, sitting on the battlefield, and then becomes a 7/5 indestructible later on in the game. Super, super good. And then we've got 2 very notable reprints that are lands even. Witch's Clinic gives Valgavoth lifelink, and as we've already said, Valgavoth gets really, really big, really, really fast, so you can gain a ton of life off its activated ability. And Graven Cairns, I don't know why it's so expensive. It's just a really good land in Rakdos colors, really good mana fixing. I guess it hasn't seen a lot of reprints, or maybe it sees like Modern Play or something like that. But yeah, it's almost $9, so it's a nice reprint here. And now we're going to be checking out the rest of the reprints. We're starting with creatures, and we're starting from the lowest mana value, working our way to the highest mana value, and then we're going to check the other card types as well, section by section. So we're going to be starting with Blood Artist, always a great thing to start with. Aristocrat staple. It's already $3. It's seen a lot of reprints, but it's like one of the best Aristocrat cards, and it's a very popular archetype, so it's always awesome to see another reprinting of this. Bloodseeker works particularly well with Valgavoth because, you know, the first creature our opponents play on their own turns, they lose life, and that triggers Valgavoth and all our group select stuff. Really, really good. Harsh Mentor, again, just a group select staple. As long as our opponents are activating things that aren't mana abilities, they just take 2 damage. It's awesome. Stormfist Crusader doesn't really work very well with Valgavoth, but it works with a group select theme. It's on our upkeep, not our opponent's upkeeps. So everybody loses a life and draws an extra card. It's kind of group huggy, group sluggy. Raids, Arisen Nightmare, awesome card. Amazing, amazing Aristocrat staple. Great card draw, and also makes our opponents lose life if they're not willing to sacrifice stuff with us. Florian, Voldaren Scion, another great card for group slug. It just is a nice payoff that draws us a bunch of cards. Mayhem Delvril, when our opponents are sacrificing things, we punish them with damage. Morbid Opportunist, we're kind of aristocratic, and also we're killing our opponent's creatures, and all that time we are drawing a bunch of cards. Rampaging Ferocidon, another group slug staple. You know, our opponents are just putting creatures on the battlefield, they take damage. I mean, we take damage too, but that's all good. Vile Smasher, we're not getting the Secret Lair version in the precon, that's for sure, so don't get this artwork, but it's another fantastic staple in a group slug deck. Falcon Wrath Noble, another pinger for aristocrats. Fate Unraveler, another fantastic staple in this deck. Our opponents get pinged every single turn on the very first card they draw, so it always triggers Valgavoth every single turn. Carador Doomscourge is another card I absolutely love. It forces combat. It's like superior goad. Everybody must attack, even creatures played that very same turn, and then when those attacking creatures are dying, you drain them, which is super awesome. Nightshade Harvester, Pingia for playing lands, always good. Rakdos Lord of Rise is a great group slug payoff as well. Your opponents are losing a bunch of life, and then you get to cast spells for cheaper, including some Simulacrum, which you can cast for 0 mana with Rakdos Lord of Rise if you had your opponents lose 4 or more life each turn. Then we got Tectonic Giants, Card Advantage and Burn, Brash Taunter, which can burn opponents and is a good blocker. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, everybody loses life. It's just, you know, Gary things. Massacre Girl is an okay board wipe. It's not super great here, I guess, but it's fine. Sir Conrad the Grim, another pinger that's really good in the deck. Combustible Gearhawk, either you deal a lot of damage to your opponents, or they let you draw some cards. Fear of Burning Alive, a new card that's awesome here. Massacre Worm, it's pretty solid in this deck. Also, whenever our opponents are losing creatures on their own turn, that triggers Valgavoth as they lose life. Care Victim Merciless, overcosted to heck, but you know what? I love this Boomer card. It's also like the OG Punisher Commander. You gotta respect it. Feed the Swarm, Seth's favorite card. Grab the Prize, another new card that is very good in the deck. Infernal Grasp, solid removal. Rakdos Charm, one of my favorite Rakdos cards of all time. I love this card. In any Rakdos deck, I gotta put it in Rakdos Charm. Especially good here in Group Slug, triggers Valgavoth on your opponent's turns. Sign in Blood, solid. Bedevil, solid. Blood Pact, solid. Chaos Warp, a staple. Light Up the Stage, nice card advantage. Decree of Pain, a nice top-end board wipe that also draws us cards. Blasphemous Act, solid. Basil's Collar is a very interesting one. We have a lot of like pingers that will get a lot of life gain with Basil's Collar, and also our commander just gets huge, so you just slap the collar onto it and just gain a whole bunch of life that way too. And all of our blockers become Death Touchers, so it's a very big deterrent for being attacked. And then we have a bunch of Mana Rocks, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone. Lightning Greaves is fantastic here. Our commander is going to be a removal magnet, and just, you know, giving haste to all other things is really good too. More Mana Rocks, Mind Stone, Rakdos Signet, Talisman of Indulgence. Thought Vessel's good here too. We're going to be drawing a lot of cards. Mask of Grizzlebrand, also pretty solid here. Enchanter's Bane, Group Slug, Bastion of Remembrance, also kind of Group Sluggy. It pings our opponents. Theater of Horrors, another Group Slug card, also card advantage. It's like the Group Slug version of Phyrexian Arena. Spiteful Visions is a little bit Group Huggy, but also Group Sluggy, obviously. And then the lands are mostly standard, but there's one cool utility land that's very good for Group Slug, and that's Lich Redan Swamp, where if we have the spare mana, we can just make each opponent lose 1 life by activating its ability, which is actually pretty decent in this deck. It's pretty solid. So that's the full deck list, and I gotta say, I really like this deck. Out of the 3 precons that I've reviewed so far, my initial thoughts is this is the best one in terms of a stock list. Like the Simic one might be the most powerful one because it could just like, it has even a combo in it where you could just ramp out all the basic lands from your entire deck just immediately onto the battlefield, which is bananas that they put that in a stock precon. But this one I think is overall the best and best design. The commander is incredibly powerful, and there's so many cards in here that are very effective at taking the maximum value out of our commander's ability. I am a little bit worried if the commander dies, does this deck have enough gas to keep on chugging along? That's my main critique of it. But I did see some, you know, alternate sources of card advantage and stuff, so it should be fine. But it is very reliant on your commander sticking around. But yeah, there's a lot of really good reprints here. I like Rakdos Group Slug. I'm very biased towards it. I like decks that kind of move the game forward, force people into action, and I think this deck does a really good job of that. And I like the card choices here. Yeah, big fan of this one. 2 thumbs up. So that's my first impression on Endless Punishment. We have one more precon to go. It also got revealed today, so I'm going to go off and do a video on that. And then after that, I'm going to be doing shorts on how to upgrade all these precons. And then after that, I'm going to be doing a commander ranking guide of all the Duskmourn legendary creatures. So just ranking all of them as potential commanders and putting them in a tier list. People seem to like that, so I'm going to do it for every single set. So if you like the sound of that, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a video. And until next time, friends, see ya!